Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of And Yet We Believe. I'm Ann Pimentel.
And I'm Roger Pimentel.
And we are a married couple having honest conversations about the messy, middle, beautiful Latter-day Saint life.
That's right. So today we are talking about why General Conference lands differently for different people. And a different way to look at this might be, why does General Conference land differently for you now than it used to?
Yeah.
Because that's what it is for me. I'm only one person, but I've kind of been a couple of different people in terms of my faith journey. Mm-hmm. I think you'd probably say the same thing.
100%.
Yeah, so that's what we want to talk about. We're going to talk about faith stages a little bit. We're going to dig in on this idea of why does General Conference land differently for different people. Anything you want to start us off with?
Well, I think one of the biggest things, even aside from stages of faith, that would be a reason is because we're all experiencing different things in our lives.
Yes.
Right? So some of us are married, others are not. Some have kids, others don't. You might have a struggle with a certain topic. You might have an LGBTQ person in your family or be LGBTQ yourself. There's a number of things that would cause you to hear words differently.
Yeah.
Some of them beyond our control, some things within our control.
Yeah. Okay. So I geeked out on this a little bit.
Okay.
Because I was a communications major in my undergrad in college. And so this kind of dovetails really neatly with like really well-established communication theory.
Okay.
Which is, so there's an old model called the Shannon-Weaver model. And there are other, probably better, more complex models now. But the basic idea is you have a sender and a receiver of any communication. But the sender encodes their communication, and then it goes through whatever channel. And then the receiver decodes that.
With their understanding.
With their understanding.
Yeah.
So what that would mean in General Conference terms is you have a general authority, and they have an idea. They have a thought. And they encode that by what they say.
Yeah. And they say, like, oh, the best way to get someone to understand this is through this analogy or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you, as the listener, the receiver in this case, you decode that, and then you understand something at the end. Do you understand what the sender was trying to send? Maybe.
Yeah.
And maybe
it depends.
not.
Yeah. I mean, if you're using an analogy, like they've used an analogy, it depends if you understand that analogy the same way.
For sure.
Right?
For sure.
So, like, there is some... maybe just common understanding when you're giving a talk to a group of fellow Latter-day Saints that they will decode it in the appropriate way that you're intending.
Right.
But that is not going to be the case as our church continues to grow in a worldwide
and you get
situation.
More diverse viewpoints and diverse lifestyles and diverse backgrounds. Right.
Yeah, people that haven't grown up in the church, they don't understand, maybe what it means to honor the pioneers or something like that, right? They're going to just hear it differently. Maybe pioneer in their language or country means something different or, has some additional thing to it.
Right. There's kind of an underlying point here, which is that there is no neutral understanding ever. Mm-hmm. There's no, you can never take something at exactly face value because you are always viewing it through your own lens, your own history, your own identity, your own trauma, your own privilege, whatever it may be. Yeah. You are always understanding something subjectively and through your own context, so it's never, ever neutral.
Right. I've heard Dan McLaren talk about that with the Bible, with translations of the Bible. Even the prophets and the people writing the scriptures, they are understanding God's words through their own perspective. And so even what they're saying, is it really the word of God? Right. It's the closest approximation of what we could understand it to be, but...
Right.
Yeah.
This is what Eugene England says in that famous essay, The Church is as True as the Gospel. Where he's saying that the gospel, we talk about the gospel as this like very pure thing, like, oh, the church, it has human beings and it's imperfect,
unchangeable.
But the gospel is pure. Well, the gospel is pure to the extent that we understand it and that we can explain it with human words and that we can tell each other and have each other understand. Yeah. And so Eugene England's argument is like, well, there may be a pure gospel. We kind of have no idea what it is.
Yeah, and even over time things change because there's certain words for Joseph Smith that meant things back then.
Sure.
That their meaning has changed, and so it's going to be different for us now.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's, I think, a really good example of this whole like encoding, decoding, understanding through a lens thing. And unfortunately, it was Elder Holland's musket fire talk.
Not a fave.
Right? Well, and so I genuinely believe that Elder Holland did not mean for that to have the reception that it had. And other people may disagree. But I think he had a thought, and he's like, oh, here's an analogy, like you said, here's a way to say this. And it landed with a whole lot of people in a way that he probably did not intend. But
you're being very generous.
I'm going to give grace on that. But yeah, people understood it through a certain lens, and either it was or it wasn't the same lens that Elder Holland intended.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago, there was a talk given, I think, by Elder Oaks, then Elder Oaks.
Sure.
About the Constitution. It had to have been him, because he's the only one that talks about it.
That's his thing.
And I remember talking to one of my friends who leans more left, and she was saying that, this is what I loved about the talk, and this is exactly, what I thought was necessary to be said at this moment.
Right.
But then she was talking to her brother, who leans very right, and he took completely different message out of the talk, and it affirmed everything that he understood about what was going on in the country. And they took the exact same talk in completely different directions.
Right. Yeah, so I conference talks are generally intended for the center, the meaty middle of the church. And if I may say so, they tend to be intended for, those with the most privilege.
100%.
I think conference talks are generally for the active, straight, white, return missionary male. Just to be totally frank.
Yep.
I think that's who they're largely intended for. And if you're listening to these talks as somebody other than that, they may not always land. I'm all of those things, the straight white male, sort of thing, and they don't always land with me either. But you get my point there.
Well, if we think about, especially historically, but it's still true today, who is giving the talk? It's the straight white male return missionary. And they're talking about what they know and understand. And so naturally it would make sense for people that are in the same boat. Right.
I have another example to give of that.
Okay.
And I'm kind of hesitant to give it because it is President Oaks. And it is his talk from the last conference, the October General Conference.
Yep.
And so, with all due respect, where respect should be, the talk was called The Family-Centered Gospel of Jesus Christ. And if you're in a, straight marriage with kids,
the ideal nucleus family,
all these things, then it probably absolutely landed, was probably lovely.
Right. Because it affirmed everything that you are.
Right. If you fall on the fringe in any of a number of ways, I'm just going to rattle these off real quick, then there was probably a gap there for you. If you're LGBT, then the talk clearly implied that your relationships are outside of God's design. If you're, infertile or unable to have children, he talked about how the commandment to bear children is and multiply and replenish the earth is still in force. If you're a single parent or single adult, even unmarried in any way, he says exaltation is a family affair. I think he's quoting President Nelson when he says that. If you're divorced or from a fractured family in some way, now he does talk about. He says many of us must do this when all of our families are traditional, and he talks about how he was raised by a single mother. But that comes after he sets this full doctrinal architecture of the normative family, and so he kind of lays this all out, and then is like, well, maybe there's an exception here, there, sort of a thing. But he's really, really clear. And so that's, to me, an example of one talk means many things to many different people.
Yeah. So let's talk for a minute, before we get into the stages of faith, let's talk about this issue of who feels seen at church and who doesn't.
Okay.
Let's just dig in a little more. And this definitely coincides or is intertwined with the stages of faith of whether you're feeling seen at church. And I think one thing that has been really helpful for me is to realize that these leaders that are talking are general leaders. They are general authority. They are not receiving revelation for one specific person or even a group of people, right? They are speaking equally to us here in Utah and the people in Ghana and the people in El Salvador and the people in Thailand. Like, they are speaking equally, and their message is not going to be, it's not going to be able to be received in the same way.
It's one talk for the whole world.
Right? Yeah. If they're saying, and I don't think this has ever been said over the pulpit, but if they're saying you need to live in a 3,000 square foot house with a white picket fence, they're giving these specifics, which often specifics come in that weird cultural way, but people in Africa are not going to have that same access or it's not going to look the same as a house here in Utah or Idaho or something would. And so just by the fact that we are an American Central, a white American Central church, things are not going to translate out into the world in the same way.
There are things from like the 1950s, 1960s. I think that For the Strength of the Youth pamphlet specifically from that era talks about, hey, you should go up in the mountains.
Yeah. Or not put curlers in, don't go out with curlers in your hair.
True. What I'm talking about, it was written from this Intermountain West thing, like, oh yeah, of course you have mountains.
Yeah.
I grew up partly in Florida. There's no mountains. Like, what am I supposed to do? And you talk about other countries and, like, that's really specific to say mountains. That's very zeroed in. That's a little bit tone deaf in that way.
Yeah. So, it has been helpful when I hear something at conference that is hard for me. It's helpful for me to remember these are general messages coming out, and I don't have to take on the weight or the burden of what they're saying and let that harm me. Okay. There's a great quote. It's from Harold B. Lee quoting. It's from Harold B. Lee in 1964, and then in his quote, he quotes Brigham Young. So Harold B. Lee says, It is not to be thought that every word spoken by the general authorities is inspired or that they are moved upon by the Holy Ghost in everything they write. I don't care what his position is. If he writes something or speaks something that goes beyond anything that you can find in the standard church works, unless that one be the prophet, seer, and revelator, please note that one exception, you may immediately say, well, that is not his, or that is his own idea. And if he says something that contradicts what is found in the standard church works, you may know by the same token that it is false, regardless of the position of the man who says it. And then it jumps down and he says, President Brigham Young said something to the effect that the greatest fear I have is that the people of this church will accept what we say as the will of the Lord without first praying about it and getting the witness within their own hearts that what we say is the word of the Lord. I think that that's really important to remember as we are hearing things from General Conference. It is imperative that we take every little bit that touches us in some way, and we take it to the Lord, and we reach out to our heavenly parents and say, is this what you want for me? Yeah. And I think maybe sometimes we have this tendency to just say, well, prophet said it, I'm going to obey it. I don't care if it hurts me or helps me. I'm going to just try my best to figure it out. Right. Instead of having this personal and tender relationship with our heavenly parents, where we say, what do you think about this for me in my life? Because they understand. They have created us completely different from anybody else, and they understand us more than anyone else.
Yep. I love that. And that includes the idea that our faith may be at a different place than it used to be. Mm-hmm. It may be different from other people. And that's where we come back to the stages of faith piece here. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about how different marginalized folks, LGBT, it might be women, might be people of color, might understand these things differently. But you don't even have to be marginalized in that sense. Sometimes your faith looks different and general conference means something different to you in that case.
Yeah, it could just land differently.
Yep.
And I don't think that is a fault of anybody, right?
Oh, no,
because
no,
none of the, I can't help it that I'm a woman, right? That is not my fault. I also can't help it that I am in the faith stage that I am in. Right? My life has taken me through this path, and this is where I'm at. And so I think understanding how we hear things differently and how we're going to be kind of approaching conference, it's really helpful for myself, but it also helps to understand how other people are hearing the talk.
Right. So let's kind of review a little bit. If you're familiar with the phase stages, we like to use Brian McLaren's model. If you're not familiar, you're going to get like the quickest ever overview in this general conference context. But for those who are at stage 1 or stage 2, which is simplicity or complexity, there's this concept of an external locus of authority, which means a whole lot of deference to church leaders, which, again, is great. There's no judgment in any of this. This is not... The stages are not good or bad. But with that external locus of authority, you might be tuning into general conference and saying, man, the words of a prophet are an absolute gift. What a wonderful thing this is. And there's little or no difference between the institution and God. In that sense, they blur together. It's like the D&C 138, whether by the voice of my servants, whether my own voice or by the voice of my servants, it is the same sort of a thing. And this was me for so many years. And this was the way I approached general conference for many years. Was it the same for you?
Totally the same.
Yep. Took notes, tuned in. We build rituals around this. We're gonna have cinnamon rolls, and there's like all these general conference journals you can buy, and
or doing like the bingo games, or the bowls of candy when you say a word. Yeah, the little packets from primary.
Oh, yeah. All of these things that kind of build it up as this kind of ritualistic sort of thing.
Yeah, so for years, conference for me was affirming. It was clear. It was motivating. It was really like this wonderful respite 2 times a year. You just got to bask in the glory of what conference was.
Yeah, and that's a faith and an approach that I kind of long for sometimes.
Interesting.
Because it was easier.
Yeah, the simplicity of it.
Yeah, absolutely. If you find yourself in stage 3, perplexity, that's where there's a meaningful shift, and that locus of authority goes from being external to internal. And that's when you start to ask yourself, what do I believe? Not just what does the church believe, but what do I believe? And so when you're listening to general conference, you are filtering through the theological complexity and through the experience that you have, and sometimes the pain that you have related to the church.
Yeah, I can give an example of one thing that I do now that is necessary for me to do. I will not go to any meeting and not do this.
Okay.
It is so painful every time.
Okay.
And that is to add in Heavenly Mother. Every single mention of Heavenly Father where she is explicitly left out, I add in and my mother, or and Heavenly Mother, or whatever. I add that in. It is exhausting, because think about a talk, any talk, how often God is mentioned.
Sure.
And it's especially odd to me when they talk about how Heavenly Father and Jesus are waiting for us in heaven. And I'm like, did you give Heavenly Mother the boot? Like, where is she? Why isn't she there waiting? I believe she's there waiting for us.
Yeah. And
it to me, the doctrine of Heavenly Mother is such an essential part of my connection to God that when she is left out, I feel left out.
Yeah.
Right? I feel pushed out. And so that is something that I do in every talk, but especially general conference, because I am begging in my heart for Heavenly Mother to be brought up in general conference more often. For anyone, any person, prayer, talk, anything, song, to just say Heavenly Parents or something. Yep. It doesn't even have to say Mother. I want Heavenly Parents. Anything to give a hint that we appreciate her. And it never It very rarely comes. And right. That is so painful.
Yeah, I think when you move from stage 2 to stage 3, you can't hear the talks the same way anymore. Yeah. And that's what I'm hearing from you is you can't hear the talks the same way because you are listening for that.
Yeah, it's like every time Heavenly Father is mentioned by himself, there's this big, like, big, like, ugly horn
air
sound.
Horn. Yeah.
Yes, that, like, didn't mention her, and I can't unhear it. And so it's loud in my head because that is happening every 5 sentences or something.
Right. Goodness. Yeah. There's things that I'm listening for. I'm listening for grace. I'm listening for God's unconditional love. And a lot of the time I hear a transactional checklist gospel. I'm listening for inclusiveness, and I hear us and them.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention as well, was anything about inclusion, loving our neighbors, that sort of stuff. I listen for that, and you're right, it is very much an us versus them, in and out sort of situation.
Yeah, black and white. I think, and maybe this is controversial, I think that selective engagement with General Conference for a stage 3 person is a faithful approach.
Yeah.
I think if you need to not watch it live and then choose later which talks you're going to listen to, or read them later instead of listening, whatever that is, if that's a better approach for your relationship with divinity, then it's better for you. It's valid. There's not like a right way. You don't have to like sit down and watch every second for it to count.
Yeah. And maybe we just put a plug in for the Instagram account, the General Conference Project.
Which is great.
It's a mother and daughter, and they give a summary, right? I mean, it's basically live,
Yeah.
They're giving a summary of what the talk is about, what trigger warnings there are, and it's not that those things trigger them every time, it's what could possibly trigger someone.
Right.
And so I think it's just a really wonderful way to say, do I want to engage with this talk right now? Maybe this one I'm going to read or something. Or watching on tape delay is also something that is helpful for me because I can fast forward something or right. I can rewind it and hear a message again.
True. Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to point out that as a stage 3 person, not every single talk is going to be hard, right?
Oh, sure.
There are still talks that are faith affirming and wonderful to listen to. Elder Kieran, we can't talk about his talks enough lately.
Yep. When
he gets up, and I mean that first talk he gave as an apostle of God is in relentless pursuit of you.
Yep.
I don't remember having any issues with any of that talk.
Yeah.
Right? I think it was all very inclusive and graceful.
Christ-centered, inclusive talk. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So just because you're in stage 3 doesn't mean everything has to be hard. It just means that, and I don't even want to say hard necessarily. There's just paradox. There's tension. And as a stage 3 person, you hold that. That's what it means to be in stage 3, right. Is to be able to hold this nuance or tension. It doesn't all have to be painful, though.
Yeah. Right.
It can be. It often is, but it doesn't have to be.
Which is why I think that selective engagement can actually be really helpful.
Yeah.
And I think somebody might counter that and say, well, you can't just pick and choose and actually have a response to that.
Turns out I can.
Hey-o. Well, I think we all pick and choose all the time. We always interpret and prioritize and contextualize just by being human beings. This is kind of like that communications model again. We are always picking and choosing. This is just being a little bit more deliberate about it.
Well, let's just point out somewhere where even your true blue member is going to pick and choose. This is something that irks me to no end, but often people will get up and take a bathroom break when a woman gets up to speak.
Ooh, rough.
Right?
Yeah.
We get 2 women, maybe 3, every full conference. And I have heard from a number of people that they will often get up and go get a snack or go to the bathroom when a woman gets up. And they often are blaming the primary, General Conference voice that right. women often have.
Yeah.
But truthfully, if we were to examine it, men that speak in conference also have a tone of voice that they use. And so why is it okay for a man to change the sound of his voice or how he talks about something and not for a woman? And why do we just push women away? if that is something that you do, take a look at yourself.
Yeah.
Like that's a moment to really examine, why am I feeling that I should get up right now?
Right.
And not for a man or something.
Yeah, that is not a good look.
Yeah. So you'd think that because we only have 2 or 3 women, that you would stay and make a point to listen to what they say.
Right. Now, if there is a stage 4 approach, which stage 4 to me is always kind of an aspirational thing, the stage 4 approach would be making room for different ways of interacting with General Conference without judging.
Yep. So
some people are going to love every single talk and going to jump on Instagram after, and there's going to be all these like flowery quote posts of little, they pop up while the sessions are still going. I think,
I mean, the church is doing it themselves.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. It's going to get a like on every one of those, and all of these things. And this is that simple, clean faith that I was talking about. This is so straightforward, and I love that. I tend to be judgmental of this group of people, but I love that faith. That stage 1 or 2 isn't more right, and neither is stage 3. If your way of interacting with General Conference is different than that, if you are engaging selectively, if you're figuring out what works for you, that's all great. And the stage 4 approach would say, hey, we all approach this differently, and that's great.
Yeah. I think that the ability in stage 4, in this harmony stage, is to be less reactive and more interpretive.
Oh,
it's like we have this comment about translating messages into my religious language. I think that is a stage 3 to stage 4 capability, to be able to hear something and hear the words that they are saying, but then translate it into something meaningful for yourself.
Oh, I love that.
Right. And so maybe the words themselves don't land well for you, but you can immediately flip that into something that is uplifting and helpful. I think that is a symbol or a characteristic of a stage like 3 moving into 4 person.
I think that's so cool, because what they say, religious language used to be the transactional thing. And I loved all that. If you do this, if you're always doing more, this kind of hustle culture sort of thing, then you'll receive celestial glory, as a reward for how many points you scored or whatever.
Yeah.
And now, like I mentioned, grace means a lot more to me. So maybe I can be translating what I'm hearing into, how does this apply to grace? How can I make this sense to the way I see the gospel now?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, as I have been approaching conference lately as a more selective practice, I'm choosing, how much I want to engage in any given session. It feels a lot more peaceful to me and approachable.
Ooh.
So there were a few years where I was like right out of the stage 2 and like finally starting to grapple with stuff and really struggling with some hard stuff, and conference would roll around and I'd sit down like I always did with a puzzle in front of me, or a coloring book or something to keep my hands busy, and I would sit through and I would just kind of suffer and not really love it.
Just kind of simmering the whole time.
Yeah, just like almost like you're getting pelted with little pebbles that are just like hurting, right? And not every talk, like I said, like it's not a consistent, for some people it maybe is. For me, it never was like from start to finish just getting berated and hit with these pebbles.
Yeah.
But over time, it just like, I just didn't like it. It was uneasy. I often was in tears. There were issues. And so now being able to approach it a little differently and with a little more grace for myself and providing space for myself, the whole situation has much less anxiety, much less like apprehension of what might be happening, but there's just more peace of like, I can read this later. If it turns out to be a great talk, awesome, I'm going to read it. I can approach that later, but I don't need to put myself through this immediate possibility of pain.
Yeah. Now there's a question in the chat that says, do you avoid specific speakers or how do you filter?
For me personally, there may be a couple speakers that I might like listen to the first little bit, and then if it's not going in a direction that I feel comfortable with, then I'll just step out. But that general conference project on Instagram, really, that is very helpful. We have 4 kids, and we are often watching on a tape delay anyway.
Yeah.
Because we, get breakfast going at the beginning, and then it's pushed out a little, and then we're doing lunch at the next session. And so we maybe just get started 10 minutes late, which is like a whole talk, right? When you watch all the songs and the prayers and all of that, then you're a talk behind.
Right.
And so if you're keeping track on Instagram, then you might have an idea of whether you want to step into it or not.
Right. Yeah, I like that.
What about you? Do you have any specific stuff, or are you just watching straight through anyway?
No, I'm definitely more selective than I used to be. There, kind of like you said, there aren't specific speakers that I'm going to automatically avoid, but I might be on alert a little bit and go, this speaker hasn't worked great for me in the past, but like you mentioned, a favorite of the show, Elder Kieran, when he comes up, I get excited.
Yeah.
And so there are speakers that I am keyed into as well.
And I think that we've also taken a more selective approach with our kids as well. I remember, I don't remember if it was last conference or the one before, but we were watching with one of our kids in the room. The others were somewhere else. And there was a talk that was being given. I don't even remember what it was, but there was a talk being given, and some of the way that he was saying stuff was not the way that we approach it. And I remember that we muted it and we just talked over it, right? Like we just said, hey, let's talk about this.
Let's have a conversation.
And that was actually really good to be able to talk with our kids and say, it's not a bad thing if you listen this way, or, if you believe this, like, that's fine. This is how we approach this.
Yep.
So.
Yep, I think that's great. And there's a question if we can put the link for the General Conference project. We'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, just some final thoughts that I have, and then, would love to hear what you have to add to that. There's some lenses and some ways to approach General Conference that I think are helpful. I'm always looking for, do I find Jesus in this?
Yeah.
Do I find something that is uplifting me? Does it sound like Jesus? Does it bear good fruit? Does it make me feel more love and mercy and hope? And if so, then ye shall know them by their fruits. Then that's going to land with me. That's what I'm going to be looking for in this coming General Conference.
Yeah, I really like that. Everything should be about Jesus, right?
Should be.
Everything we do in this church should take us back to Jesus. And I think that if something lands a little differently, or it doesn't necessarily talk about Jesus, then that's a good opportunity to ask ourselves, like, why is that sitting wrong with me? Or what is it about what was said that doesn't feel quite aligned with God, or, with my understanding or my connection to God?
Yep.
I think that we can be really curious as talks are being given, of asking, why did it land this way with me? But being curious about others, of, I wonder what they heard. And I think that especially if you're in a stage 1 or a stage 2 place, it's really hard to maybe be curious about people who are struggling, or, figuring stuff out with the gospel.
Right.
But I think that a lot of a bridge can be built if you say, I wonder how that landed for, this person. Like, we had a message on here earlier when we were talking about one of the talks that was harmful for LGBTQ people or single people, or, whatever. And somebody said that after that talk, they immediately reached out to their brother to see if he was okay.
Right.
And I think that that's a situation where you're building a bridge, where you're recognizing, this landed one way for me. I wonder if it landed differently for someone else. Yep. And so I'm going to reach out and check on them.
I love that.
And I think, that just builds that empathy and compassion for other people. And that's Christ-like, right?
That's awesome.
Yeah. I think that's all.
There is a question in the chat. I kind of worry that this is like a whole episode topic.
Oh, okay.
And the question is, how do you help your kids navigate the difference between nuance in your home versus the black and white messages that they hear at church or in other conference talks? Do you have an answer that's not a half hour long on that?
Well, there's a couple things, and I think it's important to remember in the stages of faith, or that Brian McLaren talks about, or Richard Rohr's first half and second half of life. Reading Brian McLaren is Faith After Doubt, and Richard Rohr is Falling Upward. Those are the two books that talk about this.
Yep.
For children, they often need, or first stage of life, they need to build that container first of all. Right. And so the binary black and white thinking is helpful for children to a certain degree, right? We have rules for our kids. Don't run into the street.
Right.
It's not until later in their life that you explain the rule in a way that they can understand it. But for that little kids, it is very much just don't do it.
Yep.
This is the rule. Don't run into the street. And so you have to be able to build a container in your first stage of life. And in that second stage of life, as Richard talks about it, that's where you fill the container with meaning. That's where you really connect and strengthen that relationship with your heavenly parents.
Right.
So it is very tricky to figure out how to do that with kids right now.
Yeah.
I think that, at least in our experience with our kids, we have 2 teenagers and 2 that are younger. Our teenagers are understanding things and learning about things outside of the home. At school, they're way more accepting of marginalized groups than we were growing up.
Yeah. And
so they are maybe at a different place than we were as teenagers. And so we can be a little more open and explain the nuance a little better. But there's still some, we often say, this is how the church teaches it. Mm-hmm. This is how I approach it.
Yep.
And that, I think, giving them that understanding of we can still be part of the church and also have this different approach to it, and we're okay. I think that's healthy to help kids understand.
Yeah, I love getting asked questions like this, like we're experts, like we're master parents.
We are not.
But one thing that we do, just because of who the two of us are, is we are talking about stuff all the time. Mm-hmm. And we're always discussing things. So I think our kids do hear us discussing from a nuanced standpoint a lot of these things. And we'll see what they internalize as they get older.
Yeah. Yep. Things have definitely changed.
Yeah. As they've gotten older.
As they've gotten older, as we've changed.
Yep.
Yeah. And just calling out this last comment, I love how President Nelson reworded his talk after discussing it with the women general authorities. Yeah, he asked for their advice, their input, and they kind of said, oh, it's great, we love it. And he's like, no, really, I need your opinion. And they were like, okay, change these things. And he said, I don't understand it. These are things that I don't understand, but I trust you and I'll change it. And so he changed parts of his talk. So yeah, that sort of thing is really helpful to hear. I wish that we could get that background on all the talks.
Yep.
Who did you talk to? Who did you run this by?
Yeah, who vetted this?
Did they think it was okay? Why?
Other than correlation, which I'm sure sees them. But
yeah.
All right, well, I think that will do it. Thanks so much for joining us. We had a great group on the chat today.
Yep, thanks so much. We'll see you next time.
See ya.